I had been planning our vacation for months. The destination was perfect, a tropical island with clear waters, golden beaches, and luxury resorts. It was supposed to be our time, away from the world, just the two of us, to reconnect and make memories. We'd been dating for 2 years, and I thought I knew her better than anyone. The first few days were magical. We explored the island, enjoyed candlelit dinners on the beach, and shared laughs like we always had. But then, things began to shift. She started acting distant. Her texts became less frequent, and she was glued to her phone whenever we were alone. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just busy with work or social media. But then I noticed something even more unsettling. One evening, while we were having dinner at the resort's outdoor restaurant, I saw a message pop up on her phone. I didn't mean to snoop, but I couldn't help noticing the name on the screen. Someone I didn't recognize. The message was innocent at first glance, but the way she reacted when she saw me looking was not. She quickly tucked her phone away and became unusually flustered. Later that night, I confronted her about it. At first, she denied anything was wrong, but the longer we talked, the more I could tell something was off. Her eyes darted around the room, and her responses felt rehearsed, like she was hiding something. My gut told me I was being played, and I wasn't sure I could ignore it any longer. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk alone to clear my head. I needed to think, but the nagging feeling inside wouldn't let me shake the suspicion. After returning to the resort, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do: check her messages when she wasn't around. I know it was wrong, but in that moment, I couldn't help myself. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. She'd been texting someone all week, making plans to meet up at a nearby bar. The texts weren't just friendly, they were flirtatious, with promises of secret meetings and alone time. My stomach churned as I read more. She had been seeing someone else behind my back. My vacation, my trust, it all felt like it had crumbled in an instant. I didn't say a word when she came back to the room that afternoon. She tried to act normal, but I was already too far gone. The hurt, the betrayal, it was suffocating. I knew what I had to do. I packed my bags quietly, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and sadness. I didn't want to confront her, because I knew it wouldn't change anything. She had already made her choice. I walked out the door, leaving her behind, and headed straight to the airport. I booked the earliest flight home, not bothering to say goodbye. As the plane took off, I leaned back in my seat, a strange calm settling over me. I had left behind a relationship that wasn't worth saving. The vacation that was supposed to bring us closer had only revealed the truth. She didn't care about me. She cared about her own selfish desires. I learned a lot that day, not just about her, but about myself. I deserved more than lies and deceit. And as I flew home, I knew I'd never make the same mistake again. As time passed, I found myself more at peace with the decision I had made to walk away. It wasn't easy in the beginning. There were moments of doubt, when I questioned if I had done the right thing. But those moments became fewer and farther between, and with every passing day, I began to feel stronger, more grounded in my own sense of self. I started focusing on my passions again, things that had taken a back seat while I had been caught up in the relationship. I went hiking on weekends, reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in months, and even started learning a new language. I took time for myself, to rediscover the person I had been before everything had gotten so complicated. And I realized something important. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was enough on my own. But even as I focused on myself, I couldn't completely erase the memory of her. There were times when I'd hear a certain song or pass by a place we used to visit together, and a wave of nostalgia would hit me. I wasn't bitter, but I couldn't ignore the fact that a part of me had been hurt by someone I had trusted so deeply. The hardest part wasn't letting go of her. It was letting go of the idea of what we had built together, the future I had imagined. Then one day, months after the vacation, I ran into her at a coffee shop. I had just ordered my drink and was waiting at the counter when I saw her walk in, her eyes scanning the room. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. I hadn't seen her in so long, and she looked different, smaller somehow, like she had lost some of the confidence I once admired. She spotted me immediately, and there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She hesitated, then took a few steps toward me. "Hey," she said softly, her voice almost uncertain. I looked at her for a long moment before responding.
"Hey?"
I wasn't sure what to say. Seeing her again stirred up old emotions, but I had come so far since that day on the island. I didn't want to let her pull me back into the past. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, avoiding my gaze. "I was selfish. I didn't consider how much I hurt you, and I regret it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I could feel the weight of her apology, but I couldn't bring myself to respond the way I thought I would. The anger, the bitterness, it wasn't there anymore. Instead, all I felt was a sense of finality. "I don't need your apology," I said, my voice steady. "It's over. I've moved on. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I'm not that person anymore." She nodded, her eyes slightly glistening with emotion. "I understand. I really do." For a brief moment, we just stood there, two people who had once been everything to each other but had now become strangers. I felt no anger, no resentment, just an overwhelming sense of closure. She wasn't the person I had fallen in love with, and I wasn't the same person I had been when we started. It was like we had both changed, and in some ways I was thankful for that. We parted with a simple nod, and I turned to leave. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I didn't feel the need to look back. The closure I had sought for so long had finally come, not in the form of a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet realization that I had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been before. From that moment on, I no longer carried the weight of the past. I could smile at the memory of our good times without letting them define who I was today. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free, not just from her, but from the idea that my happiness had to come from someone else. The journey was mine to take, and I was ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and life continued its quiet forward march. I found myself slowly re-entering the world of dating, but it wasn't something I rushed into. My time away from relationships had given me clarity, a deeper understanding of what I truly wanted from a partner, and more importantly, what I deserved. I was no longer the person I had been when I met her. I had grown stronger, more self-aware, and less willing to tolerate anything less than honesty, respect, and love. It wasn't long before I met someone new. Her name was Emily. She was different, not in a perfect way, but in a way that felt real. She didn't rush things. She didn't push for commitment or try to change me. We spent time getting to know each other, not through rushed conversations or extravagant gestures, but through the simple act of shared moments. We went to the movies, cooked meals together, went for long walks, and had late-night talks about everything and nothing. The foundation we built wasn't based on illusions, but on respect for each other's lives and boundaries. With Emily, I found a sense of calm I hadn't realized I had been missing. There was no pressure, no pretending, no games. It was just two people figuring out if they could be something more, one step at a time. And one night, as we were sitting on the couch, sipping wine and watching a documentary about space, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through, the painful end of the relationship, the trip that turned into a lesson, and the time it took to heal. The old scars were still there, but they didn't hurt as much anymore. They had become part of my story, something I could look back on without anger, just understanding. "I think I've been afraid of this," I admitted to Emily, the words coming out more easily than I expected. "Afraid of trusting someone again, of getting close?" She looked at me with soft eyes, her hand resting gently on mine. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "But you don't have to let the past control your future. It's all part of the journey, right?" Her words were simple, but they hit home. I realized how much I had grown since that day I left the island, when I thought the worst thing in the world had happened to me. What I hadn't seen at the time was that it was the best thing that ever could have happened. It was the wake-up call I needed to prioritize myself, to find my own worth outside of a relationship. It was the spark that led me to realize that I had the power to choose my happiness, regardless of the people around me. As time passed, I opened up more, bit by bit. I learned to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. I learned that love wasn't about avoiding hurt or disappointment, but about growing through it together. Emily wasn't perfect and neither was I. But we had something real, something based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to being better for ourselves and each other. I finally understood that sometimes you have to lose something to gain something greater. The betrayal I had suffered wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I learned to trust again, to love again, and most importantly, to never forget that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one I had with myself. So, as I stood there, looking out at the city skyline from the rooftop bar where we had gone to celebrate a small victory in my life, I smiled. The journey had been long, and there were still days ahead that would challenge me. But in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, on my own terms, stronger and more aware of the kind of love I deserved. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As the months continued to unfold, the feeling of freedom only deepened. The past, with all its pain and heartache, had become more of a distant memory, a chapter in my story that had shaped me, but no longer defined me. I had found peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned how to let go. I had learned how to be myself again, unapologetically, and it felt empowering in ways I hadn't expected. Emily and I continued to build our connection. Our relationship was not rushed. It grew at its own pace, each moment unfolding naturally. There were no grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but there was something far more meaningful: trust. It was quiet, steady, and unwavering. We shared our dreams and fears, our little victories and disappointments, always allowing space for each other to grow. It was the kind of partnership I had always wanted but never knew how to cultivate. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with something soft, almost wistful. She began, "I think you've taught me something about patience, about really listening to someone. It's easy to rush through life and relationships, but you showed me that sometimes it's okay to just be present, to let things happen as they will." Her words hit me like a warm wave, and I realized just how far we had come together. I had done a lot of work on myself over the past year, but I hadn't realized until that moment how much Emily had been doing the same, showing up, allowing our connection to evolve naturally, and trusting that our bond would strengthen through understanding and time. In many ways, she had helped me heal just by being her honest, kind, and thoughtful self. It wasn't just me who had grown from the past. Our relationship, though still new, was already rooted in a foundation of emotional depth and mutual respect. It was no longer just about two people coming together. It was about two individuals who had their own lives, their own histories, but who chose to share them with each other without fear, without games. One weekend, as we took a road trip to the countryside to visit her family, I felt something shift in me. I had been afraid for so long that my past would repeat itself, that betrayal would creep in again, that history would repeat itself in some new, unexpected way. But as we drove down quiet country roads, listening to the hum of the engine and the gentle rustling of the trees, I realized that I was no longer afraid. I trusted myself. I trusted her. And I knew that this, what we had, was something real, something worth fighting for. Emily's family was warm and welcoming, and we spent the weekend enjoying long meals, laughing over silly stories, and simply being in each other's presence. That Sunday evening, as we watched the sunset from the porch, Emily leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a moment, everything felt so right. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice soft and content. I kissed her forehead, feeling the weight of the moment. "Me too," I replied. In that quiet moment, I realized that what I had feared most, the idea that I would never trust again, that I would always carry the weight of the past, was no longer true. I had learned to love again, to trust again, to believe in the possibility of a future with someone who would be by my side, not because of need, but because of choice. As we drove back home, the future felt open and full of possibilities. I didn't know what would happen next. Relationships, like life, were unpredictable, but I had learned to embrace that uncertainty. I had learned that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I didn't need anyone to complete me. But I also knew that with the right person, life could be an adventure worth sharing. I had walked away from a betrayal on that vacation, but I had found something far more valuable on the other side: self-love, self-respect, and the courage to build a life that was truly my own. And with Emily by my side, I knew that whatever came next would be something I could face, not just with strength, but with hope. The past was behind me. The present was unfolding beautifully, and the future? Well, the future was mine to create.